The night my best friend looked me in the eye and told me I was too nice to ever say no, she was right. What she didn't know was that I had been saying no for months. I just hadn't told her yet. Let me start at the beginning, because the beginning is important. Not the dramatic part, the quiet part, the part that feels like nothing. It was a Tuesday in early October. I remember because I had just bought a new desk calendar, the paper kind with the big squares, and I was filling in appointments with a blue felt tip pen. The light in my kitchen was that flat grey afternoon light that makes everything look a little tired. I had a cup of tea going cold on the counter. The radiator was making its usual ticking sound, like a clock that couldn't quite commit to a rhythm. I was 34 years old, I worked in insurance administration, and my biggest personality trait, if I'm being completely honest, was that I hated making other people uncomfortable. That is not a virtue. I know that now. At the time, I called it being considerate. My therapist later called it a fawn response. My mother called it being too soft. Whatever you call it, the result was the same. I said yes when I meant no. I smoothed things over when I should have let them stay rough. I kept the peace at the cost of my own. My best friend's name was Carla. Carla was the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately became the reason the room existed. She had dark hair she wore in a low ponytail that always looked accidentally elegant. She laughed loudly and apologized for nothing. She was the person at every dinner table who ordered for the whole group and somehow got it exactly right. People loved her. I loved her. We had been friends for 11 years, since we were both new employees at the same firm, eating sandwiches in the stairwell because the break room made us anxious. She was magnetic. I was the person standing next to the magnet, which is a specific kind of invisible. But I didn't mind. That is the thing I need you to understand. I genuinely did not mind. I liked being her friend. I liked the way she called me on random Wednesday evenings just to talk. I liked that she remembered my mother's birthday and my fear of escalators and the name of the teacher who had humiliated me in front of the class when I was 12. She knew me, or I thought she did. The first time she asked me to lie for her, it didn't feel like lying. It was March, 7 months before that October Tuesday. We were at her apartment, sharing a bottle of wine that she had already mostly finished, and she told me that she needed a favor. She said it the way she always said things, with that slight tilt of her head, and the smile that meant she already knew you were going to say yes. She was seeing someone, not her partner, Dominik, someone else, a man named Florian, who she described as complicated and interesting, which in my experience are the two words people use when they mean unavailable and bad for them. She said it was nothing serious. She said Dominik was going through a difficult phase and they had basically stopped connecting. She said it as though connection was a utility that simply ran out, like hot water. She needed me to be her alibi, just for one evening. She was going to tell Dominik she was having dinner with me. All I had to do was not contradict that if he happened to ask. I said yes, I know. But I want you to understand the specific texture of that moment, because it matters for everything that comes later. She was my best friend. She was sitting on her kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet, because she always sat on the floor when she was being serious. She had mascara slightly smudged under one eye. She looked genuinely vulnerable, which was rare for Carla, and rarity made it feel precious. I told myself it was a one-time thing. I told myself I was supporting her through a hard period. I told myself a lot of things. I did not write it in my calendar, but I remembered it. The dinner with me alibi happened 4 more times over the following 2 months. Each time she called ahead, gave me the date and the approximate time frame, and I nodded along and said of course and kept the information in my head. I never met Florian. I never asked many questions. I was the alibi, not the confidant, which in retrospect is an important distinction. Dominik, a mutual friend of ours, mentioned once in passing that Dominik seemed stressed lately. I said nothing. I refilled her glass. Then in May, something changed. Carla called me on a Sunday morning, which was unusual. She didn't do mornings. Her voice was different. Not the warm, conspiratorial voice she used when she wanted something. This was clipped, slightly formal. She said she needed to talk to me about something delicate. She came over that afternoon. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had been filling in my calendar, and she told me that some money had gone missing from a shared account she held with Dominik. Not a small amount, roughly 4,000 euros, withdrawn over 6 weeks in increments small enough not to trigger an automatic alert. Dominik had noticed. He was asking questions. He wanted to know where she had been on certain dates. I felt something cold move through me. Not shock exactly, more like recognition. She looked at me with those clear eyes and said, "I need you to remember that we were together on the 14th of April. We had dinner. You paid with your card. Can you remember that?" I looked at her for a long moment. I said, "The 14th of April was a Saturday." She said, "Yes." I said, "I was at my cousin's wedding on the 14th of April. I was 300 kilometers away." A very brief silence. She said, "Right, but maybe we could say it was a different date." And there it was, the thing underneath the thing. The first time she had asked me to lie for her, she had framed it as protecting herself from a difficult conversation. Now she was asking me to lie for her to cover up 4,000 euros of missing money. These are not the same category of problem. I said I needed to think about it. She said, "You always overthink things. You're too nice for your own good, you know that? You can't say no to people. Just help me with this one thing." She said it lightly, almost affectionately, the way you say something you believe so completely. It doesn't occur to you to soften it. She genuinely believed I was incapable of refusing her. She had 11 years of evidence to support that belief. I told her I'd be in touch. She left. I stood at my kitchen window and watched her walk to her car. She was on her phone before she even reached the door. I noticed she didn't look back. I went to my desk calendar. I am an insurance administrator. My entire professional life is organized around documentation, timelines, and the careful preservation of evidence. I know what a paper trail looks like. I know what the absence of one looks like. I had been keeping my calendar meticulously for 4 years, not because I expected to need it, but because that is simply how I function. Every appointment, every note, every small event that broke the routine of a day, I went back through the pages. April 14th, cousin's wedding, circled in red because I had been anxious about the speech I had to give. The 5 evenings Carla had used me as an alibi, all noted because I had written them down each time. Not as cover, not as strategy, simply because I wrote everything down. I had noted them as Carla dinner, with the time she had called and the time frame she had given me, because I am the kind of person who notes things. I looked at those entries for a while. Then I went to my email and found the receipt from the taxi company I had used to get to the wedding venue, because the trains were complicated that weekend. The receipt had the date, the pickup address, the destination, and the time. It was time-stamped at 11:47 in the morning on April 14th. I was very clearly not at dinner with Carla. I made a folder on my computer. I labeled it administrative. Over the next 3 weeks, I added to it carefully the taxi receipt, photographs of the relevant calendar pages taken on my phone, a screenshot of the wedding invitation with the date, a photograph someone had taken of me at the reception, posted on a family group chat, also time-stamped. And then the voice message. In February, 2 months before the money disappeared, Carla had sent me a voice message on a Wednesday evening. She had been slightly tipsy. She was talking about Florian, and in the middle of the message, rambling and warm, she had said, "I've been taking a little from the joint account anyway, just for the Florian evenings. Dominik never checks it properly. And honestly, what he doesn't know won't hurt him. You know how he is." She had sent it to me by mistake. She had said so immediately after, sending a follow-up message that said, "Ignore that. Wrong person. Long story. Love you." I had never deleted the first one. I don't know why. I'm not a strategic person by nature. I think at the time it simply felt like something I should keep. The way you keep a receipt, even when you don't expect to need it. I had listened to it twice when it arrived, felt a quiet unease, and then set my phone face down and gone back to whatever I was doing. I had not thought about it again until I opened that folder and started building a timeline. I listened to it again that evening. I was taking a little from the joint account for the Florian evenings. I sat with that for a long time. I did not call Carla. I did not confront her. I did not post anything, tell anyone, or make any dramatic move. I added the voice message to the folder. I noted the date it was sent, the date of the follow-up, and I wrote a short, factual summary of what it confirmed, that she had been aware of the withdrawals and had described them as intentional. Then I made myself a cup of tea, and I thought about who else was affected by this. Dominik. I had met Dominik maybe 20 times over the years. He was quiet, steady, the kind of man who brought good wine to dinner parties and listened more than he spoke. He had always been kind to me, in the undemonstrative way of people who are kind without needing credit for it. He did not deserve to be lied to. He did not deserve to have 4,000 euros taken from a shared account while his partner told him she was having dinner with me. I was not going to be the instrument of that deception anymore. But I also needed to be careful. Carla was charming, and I was quiet, and I was aware that in any public version of this story, charm tends to win the first round. I needed to be precise. I needed to be ready. I called Carla back 2 days after her visit. I told her I was sorry, I couldn't help her with the alibi. I said I had thought about it carefully, and it wasn't something I was able to do. I kept my voice even. I gave no explanation beyond that. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, I understand. No worries." She said it in a tone that meant the opposite of all three of those things. Over the following 2 weeks, the messages from her became shorter and cooler. She stopped calling on Wednesday evenings. She responded to my texts with 1 or 2 words. I recognized the pattern. It was social pressure, the slow withdrawal of warmth designed to make me come back and offer what she wanted. I had seen her do it to other people. I had watched her do it to a colleague who had declined to cover for her on a project deadline. The colleague had eventually apologized and covered for her anyway. I did not apologize. I kept adding to the folder. In mid-June, our mutual friend Dominik called me. She sounded strange, careful, the way people sound when they are trying to get information without appearing to ask for it. She said she had heard that Carla and Dominik were going through something. She said Carla had mentioned that there had been some confusion about money and that Dominik was being unreasonable. She said Carla had also mentioned that I had been acting distant lately. I said, "I see." Dominik said, "Is everything okay between you two?" I said,
I think that's something Carla would need to speak to you about directly. Dominik paused. She said, "That's very diplomatic of you." I said, "I'm trying. I did not tell Dominik anything." But I noted the date of the call,
And I noted what Carla had apparently been saying about me. She was already managing the narrative. She was getting ahead of it, framing herself as the victim of an unreasonable partner and a distant friend, building sympathy before anyone could ask the harder questions. I understood then that this was going to come to a head. It was just a matter of where and when. The dinner was Dominik's idea. She hosted a group dinner every few months, a rotating cast of 8 or 10 people, the kind of evening that felt casual, but was actually quite carefully orchestrated. She called it a kitchen supper, which meant she cooked and everyone brought wine, and the conversation ran long. I had been going for years. Carla had been going for years. Dominik had come several times. Dominik called me in late September to invite me. She mentioned, in passing, that she had also invited Carla and Dominik. She mentioned it the way you mention something when you want to give someone the option to decline. I said I would love to come. She paused. Then she said, "Good. I think it'll be good for everyone to be in the same room." I said, "I agree." I spent the next 2 weeks being very calm. I went to work. I filled in my calendar. I drank my tea. I did not rehearse speeches or plan dramatic confrontations. I simply made sure my folder was complete, that every piece of documentation was clear and organized, and that I knew exactly what I was willing to say and what I was not. I also made a decision about the voice message. I transferred it to a small, clearly labeled file on my phone, marked with the date it was received. I did not intend to play it in the middle of dinner. I am not a theatrical person, but I wanted to have it with me. The dinner was on a Saturday in October, the second Saturday, to be precise. I noted it in my calendar with a blue felt-tip pen. Dominik's dinner. No other annotation. I arrived slightly early, which is my habit. Dominik's apartment smelled like garlic and rosemary. The table was set for 9. The kitchen was warm. She hugged me and handed me a glass of wine. and said nothing about the situation, which I appreciated. People arrived in the usual gradual way. Marcus and his girlfriend, Petra and her husband. 2 people I didn't know well, friends of Dominik's from her running group. Then Carla. Carla arrived with the particular energy of someone who decided to be radiant tonight. She was wearing a dark green dress and the low ponytail, and she came in laughing at something on her phone, which she showed to Dominik. And Dominik laughed, and then Carla looked around the room and saw me, and her smile stayed exactly in place, but something behind her eyes went very still. She crossed the room and kissed me on both cheeks. She said, "You look great. I've missed you." I said, "Thank you. You look great too." And then Dominik arrived. I had not known Dominik was coming until that moment. Dominik had said she'd invited them both, but I had assumed that meant they would come together or that one of them would cancel. Instead, Dominik arrived alone, 5 minutes after Carla, and the room did one of those subtle recalibrations that happens when people sense something they don't yet have words for. Carla's radiance flickered, just for a second. Then she smiled at him, warm and practiced, and said his name, and he nodded at her with the careful politeness of someone managing something privately. We sat down to dinner. For the first hour, it was a perfectly ordinary dinner. The food was good, the wine was good. Marcus told a long story about a disastrous camping trip. Petra's husband talked about his new job. The running group friends were pleasant and uncomplicated. Carla talked a great deal, which she always did. And she was funny and warm, and the table responded to her the way it always did. I ate my dinner. I listened. I spoke when spoken to. I was the quiet one. I was always the quiet one. At some point, the conversation shifted to relationships. The way it does at a certain point in a long dinner. Petra mentioned that she and her husband were renewing their vows next year. This led to a general discussion of commitment and trust and what makes a relationship work. It was the kind of conversation that sounds philosophical, but is actually quite personal. Carla said something about how the foundation of any relationship is knowing that the other person has your back. She said it with feeling. She said that when you have a person who supports you unconditionally, who is always there for you no matter what, that is the most important thing. She looked at me when she said it. I held her gaze. Dominik, who had been quiet for most of the meal, said, "I think the foundation is honesty. Without that, the rest doesn't mean very much." A small silence. Carla said lightly, "Of course, honesty is important." Dominik said, "I've been trying to understand something for a few months now. A financial situation. I keep coming back to the same question, which is, who knew about it and when?" The table became very still in the way that tables become still when everyone realizes the conversation has changed categories. Carla said, with a careful laugh, "Dominik, maybe this isn't the time." Dominik said, "When is the time, Carla? You tell me, and I'll be there." He wasn't angry. He was the kind of calm that comes after a long time of being confused. He looked around the table, not dramatically, just honestly, and he said, "She told me she was having dinner with a friend on several occasions. I've been trying to verify the dates. I thought maybe someone here could help me understand the timeline." He was not looking at me specifically. He was asking the table. Carla said, "I really think we should talk about this privately." I said, "I can speak to the dates, if it's helpful." Everyone looked at me, including Carla. Her expression was very controlled, but I knew her face well enough to see the thing underneath it, which was a kind of disbelief. I was the last person she had expected to speak. I said, "Carla asked me to be her alibi on 5 occasions between March and May. I agreed to the first one. I didn't agree to the others, but I also didn't correct the record at the time, and I should have. I'm sorry for that." Carla said, "That's not what happened." I said, "I have the dates in my calendar. I have a taxi receipt for April 14th that places me 300 kilometers away at the time she told Dominik we were having dinner. I also have a voice message from February in which she mentioned withdrawing money from a joint account for personal expenses. Very quiet. The kind of quiet that has texture. Carla said, "You're misremembering. You always do this. You get anxious and you misinterpret things." I said, "I have the voice message on my phone. Would you like me to play it?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "You saved that?" I said, "You sent it to me? I never deleted it." She said, "I told you to ignore it." I said, "I know." Another silence. Carla said, I can't believe you're doing this. You're my best friend. You're supposed to have my back. I said, I do have your back. I just stopped having it at the expense of everyone else's. She looked around the table. She was looking for the room to be on her side. She was used to rooms being on her side. She was charming and warm and funny, and she had spent 11 years being the person everyone liked. But Dominik was looking at her hands. Marcus was looking at the table. Petra was looking at her husband. The running group friends were looking at their wine glasses. Carla said, This is humiliating. You're humiliating me in front of everyone. Dominik said, quietly, How do you think I've felt for the last 3 months? She turned to him. She started to say something. Then she stopped. I did not play the voice message. I didn't need to. The offer had been enough. She knew what was on it. She knew I had it. She pushed her chair back from the table. She picked up her bag. She said, I need some air. She walked to the door of the apartment, and she opened it, and she stood there for a moment. And I think she was waiting for someone to follow her, for me to follow her. That was the pattern. She created the exit, and I was the person who came after her and smoothed it over and brought her back and made it okay. No one followed. After a moment, she left. The door closed. Dominik refilled everyone's wine. She did it slowly and carefully, the way you do when you need something to do with your hands. Marcus cleared his throat. The running group friends started a quiet conversation about something entirely different, which was kind of them. Dominik looked at me across the table. He said, Thank you. I said, I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. He nodded. He didn't say it was fine, which I appreciated. It wasn't entirely fine, but it was honest. We stayed another hour. The dinner found its footing again, slowly, the way dinners do when people decide to let them. I ate the rest of my food. I drank my wine. When I left, Dominik hugged me in the doorway for a long time without saying anything. In the weeks after the dinner, I learned things in pieces, the way you learn things that happen to other people. Carla and Dominik separated. He had already been in contact with a financial advisor about the account situation before the dinner. The withdrawals were documented. She had not been subtle about them because she had never expected to be caught. Or rather, she had never expected that the person she had relied on to smooth things over would stop doing so. The financial advisor's review confirmed the pattern of withdrawals matched the dates of her evenings with Florian, which meant the voice message was not the only evidence. It was simply the most personal one. She called me once, about 10 days after the dinner. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that started with anger, moved through justification, and ended in something that sounded like grief. She said I had always been the stable one. She said she had relied on me too much. She said she was sorry, but the sorry was buried under enough qualifications that it was hard to find. I listened to the message twice, then I saved it in the administrative folder, which I recognize is a particular kind of response. But I am an insurance administrator. Documentation is how I process things. I did not call her back. Our mutual friends navigated the aftermath with varying degrees of grace. Dominik was loyal to both of us in the way that means she said nothing unkind about either of us to anyone, which is the only kind of loyalty I wanted. Marcus texted me once to say he was glad someone had finally said something, which was more than I had expected from him. Petra sent me a long message about how brave I had been, which I found slightly exhausting but well-intentioned. The narrative Carla had been building, the one where she was a chaotic but lovable person, caught in a difficult situation, collapsed under the weight of specifics. It is very hard to maintain the chaotic but lovable story when there are calendar dates and taxi receipts and a voice message in your own voice, describing exactly what you did and why. Charm is powerful, but it is not more powerful than documentation. I went back to my desk one evening in November. The flat grey light again, the radiator ticking. I made a cup of tea and I sat down with my calendar. I turned back through the pages, all the way to March, and I looked at those entries. Carla dinner, the times she had called, the time frames she had given me. I thought about the version of myself who had written those entries, who had said yes because she couldn't bear to make someone uncomfortable, who had told herself that keeping the peace was the same as being a good friend. I turned to the current page. November. The squares were mostly empty, which felt like space rather than absence. I picked up my blue felt tip pen. I wrote, in the square for that day, said no, felt fine. I know that sounds small, but I want you to understand what it cost me. All those years of yes. Not the big yeses, not the dramatic ones. The small daily yeses. The yes to covering for someone. The yes to pretending I hadn't heard what I'd heard. The yes to making myself smaller so someone else could be bigger. Those yeses accumulated into a version of me that had become so committed to avoiding conflict that she had lost track of what she actually believed. Carla had said I was too nice to ever say no. She was right for a long time. She was wrong about what would happen when I stopped. I had thought that saying no would feel like losing something, like breaking something that couldn't be repaired. Instead, it felt like putting down a very heavy bag that I had been carrying for so long I had forgotten it wasn't part of my body. I thought about the voice message, the one she had sent by mistake, the one she had immediately told me to ignore. I had not ignored it. I had kept it. The way you keep something when a part of you knows, even if the rest of you isn't ready to admit it, that it is important. That quiet part of me had been paying attention all along. It had been making notes, keeping receipts, preserving evidence, not out of strategy, out of honesty, out of the small, stubborn insistence that what actually happened matters more than the version of events that is most convenient. The people who rely on your niceness are not always relying on the best part of you. Sometimes they are relying on your inability to protect yourself. Those are not the same thing, and the difference matters enormously. A clear no is not a cruelty. It is not a betrayal of friendship or loyalty or love. It is sometimes the most honest thing you can offer. It is the line that says, this is where I am, and this is where I stop, and I am not going to pretend otherwise for the sake of your comfort. I said no to Carla, and she lost her alibi and her relationship, and the careful story she had constructed about herself. I don't take pleasure in that. I take something more complicated than pleasure. I take the recognition that those losses were already built into the choices she had made. I was not the cause of them. I had simply stopped being the buffer between her and their consequences. The tea on my counter that November evening was still warm. I noticed that. Small mercy. I drank it. My calendar sat open on the desk, the blue squares of November stretching ahead, mostly empty. I had a dentist appointment on the 12th, a work review on the 19th, a dinner with Dominik on the 23rd, just the two of us, which she had suggested and I had accepted without checking whether it was convenient for anyone else. I looked at the calendar for a while, then I picked up the blue felt tip pen and I wrote, in the square for the 23rd, dinner with Dominik, just us. I underlined it, not for emphasis, just because I wanted to. The radiator ticked. The light was grey and flat and honest. I was 34 years old, and I was learning, later than I would have liked, but not too late, that the most important yes I had ever said was the one I said to myself when I finally, quietly, without drama or speech or performance, decided that my own account of events was worth preserving. I closed the calendar, I washed the cup, I turned off the kitchen light, and I did not feel guilty about any of it.